Welcome. Today I have a very special guest that I have not had the joy or honor of interviewing in this way yet. I am so excited to have my mom, Jan Peacocke, who is also the co-founder of GoStrategic and a teacher and speaker and counselor and all sorts of things, with us today to talk about child raising. So I'm very excited to have you.
Yes, and I have good examples to show you.
Maybe, right? I don't know. So I wanted to do this podcast with you because you have a wonderful audio series called Raising Godly Children. And I recently revisited it and just saw, oh my goodness, all these gems in there and pearls of wisdom and practical applications, and just really excited to dive in with you today around what you did when you were raising us and what you've seen even now with your grandkids. And it's just a wonderful opportunity to, an interesting thing to have a daughter interview a mother on this, I think. So we'll see what all comes up, but excited to dive into raising godly children. So with that, my first question for you, when we talk about child raising, I think most people automatically think of that proverb that says, train a child up in the way that he should go. And you talk about in your series the crucial component of training and the distinction really of training. I just want to read a little quote here from you, that we are working to be teaching them how to build their lives line upon line and establishing a lifestyle that will allow them to flourish as a spiritual being, not just a physical being, but a spiritual being. And you also in that section talk about contrasting building a child's character versus just controlling their behavior, which I think is a very important distinctive. So can you expand a little bit for us on your perspective around that relative to the importance of training, a holistic approach, and also that character attribute that really leads to flourishing?
Well, character really is the substance of who, it's the spiritual, the demonstration of the spiritual attributes that God has put in you. And that's developing who God made you to be. And controlling behaviors is making a well-socialized, good etiquette human being. And it's not that we don't need some of both, but because we want the whole being that God has created to flourish, and the attributes that are eternal, the spiritual parts are eternal, and they're the ones that really supply the light on the obedience parts.
And that's, I love that, because it's the eternal, it's the right there I hear initially just it's the eternal perspective, that it is that long, we want this person to this human being to develop in the long run this character that's going to extend throughout their life and into eternity, versus that short-term perspective of, I just need this to handle this behavior in the short run. So that's a long-term perspective, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Control isn't the issue. So much of what we talk about in child raising in the secular world is really based on how much control you can have over your child. And we're looking for self-government, not forced external situations on our children, because we know God has made them for eternity.
Yes, very good. Actually, that's a great segue into what I wanted to ask you next, which is coming out of Proverbs as well, that scripture that we all know, I think, pretty well, where there's no vision, the people cast off restraint, but happy is he that keepeth the law. And I think a lot of times we emphasize that first part of, oh, there's no vision, they cast off restraint, but I think we don't always emphasize that second part of happy is he that keepeth the law. And you do this again. I just want to read a portion from your series that I just thought was so powerful this way. You expand on this idea that happy is he who keepeth the law, because the law is what God has designed to make life work. You share, the law isn't a legalistic restraint, it's spiritual enabling. I love that. It's not legalistic restraint, it's spiritual enabling. It tells us where the limits are and where the return is on our investments. So let's talk about this idea of the freedom and the happiness that comes in the law, in keeping the law, and how do we communicate that to our kids?
Well, the 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 law is always seen as usually as an inhibitor or a press down or a negative situation, whereas in God it's just a protective fence from getting into things that aren't what you want, aren't what you need. They're not the right way. And so when you have a understanding of the law that way, it is leaves you everything but that fence that's across the pasture. The whole pasture is open to you, but don't cross the fence. And that, I think, makes it easier to make our choices in life. It really gives us a lot more freedom than if there wasn't the law, because the law is you've got the life jacket on.
So what you're saying there too is really flips on its head what our culture pushes again, of the negative of this law is to restrain me in a bad way. And actually it's really again meant to protect, and it true freedom begins in self-government. I know that's a big adage that we say at the ministry.
Yep.
And that's really what you're talking about, of shifting the kid's perspective on the law, that it's not a negative, that it really is there as protection. And again, that I know that that's very contrary to what the world teaches, right?
Yes, and it's like the arsenic. If there's a drinking fountain, it's the only drinking fountain that you see around, but it says, "Beware arsenic contaminated." Drinking from it is a mistake. No matter how much you think you want it or you could use it, it's a mistake because you don't want the arsenic.
So seeing those things that maybe that people don't realize are actually going to hurt them. That's why we have the limits. Yeah.
Yep.
So this segues into emphasis where you're talking about what is right, the emphasis of what is right, not just what is wrong, as far as how our approach to the law. And I want to read just again a little section from your teaching that I think is helpful for this part of the discussion. You say, just like the biblical law only restricts a few actions so that we're able to have the freedom of everything else, you can see that it's much better for a law base to tell us a few things we can't do rather than prescribe what we ought to do. That is why we're getting these rooms and rooms and rooms full of legislative law, all these nitpicky laws that happen all over the world that people can't even keep up with what they say, because they're so specific and going after, prescribing things. Because what we're trying to do is prescribe what everyone ought to do and taking away their individuality and their freedom of choice, rather than just limiting the few things that hurt the whole. Because that really is the basis of the law. We're told it comes down to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, their soul, their mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. So the only restrictions are those actions that are harmful to us or harmful to other human beings. And the Lord doesn't want us hurting ourselves or others with our sins. Can you expand on this idea again about living a life focusing really that the law is meant actually to bring more freedom of choice, and that it really can be simplified, communicating that to your kids of the simplified nature of what it really means to obey the law, loving the Lord and loving others?
I don't think you can directly teach that until they have at least the maturity of a 15 or 16-year-old. Now, I know some kids are still not there at 18 and some kids are already there at 12. But so much of what we do in the early times is getting our children's spirits in a place that they can receive things, and that they're not going to be spending a lot of time undoing habits that they never should have acquired in the first place. The law, with toddlers, it's easier because no, don't do that. Because if you do that, you could fall out the window and die,
right? Right.
Whatever. But when you get in elementary school, I would say that's when getting your children to understand the concept of obedience being a virtue in itself, it goes a lot. And and I know memory work is a great thing for children before they're at the age of reasonableness. I think it's 11 or 12 before a child is really capable of being reasonable.
Certain type of reason, yeah.
Yeah, so you have to have rules that they're expected to obey, and usually you can tell them why. And a lot of times parents find when they give a rule that the child doesn't want to hear, they'll say why to you. So sometimes you have to say, because I said so, because they don't want the burden of why that is the case, or they're
not really capable of understanding it at that point. Yeah. But what I'm hearing from you is then that in the early years, you may have to you instruct in the law and they may not understand it, but you're giving those boundaries. And then as they get older, then it becomes, as they're growing in their maturity, to actually reason with them more, to explain why the law, what it is and what it means, and the benefits of it, right? You can have a different kind of depth of conversation.
Yes, it becomes more theology in the sense of you're talking about God's nature, God's character, and that is what is so shown in the law. I know a lot of times I just finished a long section in Judges, which showed a lot of bad choices, and sometimes the people were cut off at the knees, and sometimes they were given the pass to go ahead, and it's not always obvious why one got one and one got the other, but on occasion, I wish I had thought of this as an example, but I could have looked up. On occasion, God does tell us just why, and it's frequently because the circumstance they were in most obviously was the basis of their choice, but God had put it in the larger context of what he had already showed the person to be his intent and where he was going, and they failed for that reason.
So let's talk about attitudes, because attitudes is a big thing. And again, I think this is a distinctive, I personally think, really in Christian parenting. Certainly contrasts with the humanistic approach of just letting your kids discover who they are on a level with no boundaries and not acknowledging, trying to just, there's a whole different philosophy there. That I think this is a distinctive in Christian parenting. Understand, or should be distinctive. It isn't always what it's supposed to be. That attitudes that you talk about attitudes being the key to developing character. That it's a key to that. I just want to read again an example you gave that I think is really, really good here. You talk about it being the key to character. If a child who is doing a chore one day is a regular chore and you find a scowl on their face when you ask them to do it and you don't nip it in the bud, then the next day they'll be grumbling with their mouth. And the day after that, you'll have to ask them 3 times to do it. And then eventually they probably just won't want to do it and they'll shrink away. We all know that can happen. So what you need to do is realize that the attitude is like a seed that will sprout and it will end up in a defiant action. So you have to nip the attitude before it becomes a problem. And I love that kind of example you give of how it develops. First, it's they're annoyed in their face. Then it's them saying stuff. Then it's them not doing it. And I think that's such a practical example that I know we all have seen with our children. And so what other, feel free to just expand on that a bit around why going after attitudes is so important, and maybe why don't we do it sometimes?
Because sometimes we agree with our child that it was just a little thing, the little look on their face, but we don't realize we're actually saving them hassle if we treat it when it's a little look on their face rather than when it has become just full-faced disobedience. And I was hard-nosed, as you probably know. That disobedience was just the one thing you could not tolerate. Whether or not I was right, whether or not if I'd reconsidered it, it would have been different or not. The disobedience, you have to be able to count on the child. This is an example I may have given in the thing. One time we were ministering in Hawaii and we had an afternoon off. We went to the beach, and Rachel, everyone was following, but Rachel had been momentarily, that's
my older sister.
Yep. She'd been momentarily distracted And when she turned around, we were already in the middle of the street. And Dad saw that she was over
About to
there.
come
And
into it, yeah.
he said, don't come. And if she had waited, if she'd gone 1 second more, she would have been hit by a bus, literally.
Yeah.
So the requirement of obedience is also, so in the spirit, when we hear God on something, we know we need to obey then, not later, not after we thought about it, not after we
Right.
understood it, but we had to be responsible then. And that also, when I explain that to people, a lot of times our obedience has a big effect on somebody else. It's not for our sake, it's for their sake. And that is what I've seen more and more as you get into some of the so-called legalistic things. It's the effect on others, because God cares for people beside you.
Yeah, that are maybe seeing your example.
Mhm.
And having, with that story with Rachel, I know it was level, did she have enough trust that she didn't see the bus, she didn't know,
Yes.
but she recognized the voice of her father and obeyed, even though she didn't know and didn't see. And I mean, what a great example for us as children of the Lord to ourselves in our
Yes.
walk, right?
Yep.
So another area that you highlight in this series is looking at your child's strengths and their weaknesses and coaching them in that way. And I know another piece connected to this is kind of, some people have said, your greatest weakness is actually your greatest strength, like flipped on its head, right? And so talk to us a bit about maybe some of how you handled that with 3 rambunctious children. All 3 of us are strong-willed. And I think all of us had a level of ambition and all those different things. So talk to us a bit about that handling the strengths and weaknesses, and not squelching the strength, but also not tolerating or helping strengthen the weakness.
Our strengths are meant to be something that can protect a weakness. And I like the example of the knee in almost all sports. The knee is a weakness in the sense of, as a joint, it's the easiest thing to get injured. But it takes the strength to protect that knee, because not only is it the easiest thing to get injured, it is the most necessary thing in order to be able to move. And so as we find an apparent weakness, I mean, sometimes, in the movies, the bad guy has to get the other guy to be just as bad because he sees the weakness of the good guy not being willing to be bad when he was, he was wanted to be or whatnot. But a weakness is oftentimes the most tender part of the person also. And so you need to find the tenderness or the good part of the weakness, and be able to show that to the adult or child, because a lot of people have the same, at any point in their lives, and show that to them so that they can appreciate the need to protect that weakness, because it is an important part in their overall being.
Yes, that's good. So one part that you had that I really, really loved talking about, and it's so interesting because she recorded this series quite a few years ago, because we were still kids at the time, and I'm an adult now with my own, children. But I want to bring this up because I just imagine if it was bad back then, we know how much worse it is now. And this is around the issue around the time that we put with our kids with extracurricular activities, and that cutting into our personal time as a family, and our time at church, and our time with those related activities and such. And again, I just want to read an excerpt here where you talk about this. So you said, a major difficulty most of us have as parents is trying to set our time priorities. We frequently find ourselves trying to meet the expectations that the world has for being a, quote, good parent, making sure our child is exposed to all the possibilities and opportunities that the world has to offer. That means that our kids have to be on the soccer team, or maybe we want them to have piano lessons, or that they ought to be doing several activities at several different places, and that we need to just make that work. But I want to make you look at this from another perspective. That is that we also have the goal of developing the spirit. We don't really have time to do both, and we're going to have to decide which is more important to us, whether or not their soul is exposed through all of these possibilities or whether or not their eternal spirit is developed. Many families put a lot more time and emotional energy during soccer season, for example, than they maybe do for church. And what is that telling your child? It's telling your child that maybe church is very important at times, but it's not quite as important as soccer. And if we allow the soccer schedule to determine the church attendance, again, we put our children into the world's perspective rather than Christ's perspective. Now, we're not anti-soccer. We're not anti those activities. But what I think is so important here is looking at, you're obviously talking about the emphasis we put on some of the soul-like activities, and they're not bad. Again, and we know character is developed through sports and all those things. But I just think the emphasis here of looking at, let's talk more about that, of what we're emphasizing to our kids by how we choose to spend our time and what that means we're giving up.
Yeah. Well, for the unbeliever, I really do believe having your children in the sports and these kinds of activities helps them to get character training that they are not getting anyplace else. So in that sense, I'm definitely not against it. And all my kids had a physical interest, so to speak.
Yeah.
But you can't do it all. And the thing that was hardest again, when we started, we with our kids, it was still there was championships games in the NFL would not be shown on a Sunday.
Yeah.
Sunday,
it was a different culture back then.
Sunday was just the Sabbath.
Yeah, family day.
It was
Sabbath,
just this was a family day primarily, because the family was, the center of the home in the United States, and we had those things that hadn't been taken away from us. So that was a huge difference there. And now I know there's very little support. You get a situation where you had a child, you did make it so that they had to be there on a Thursday practice, but then they make the playoffs, and the playoffs is on Saturday or Sunday. But you can, and I'm not saying you should never make the exception, but I'm just saying it's probably better not to have too many interests at the same time going, because you're going to have almost an impossibility of having, the whole family there for dinner any night in the week, and things which are really known to build, There's I think it was Ronald Reagan said that the real big changes in our culture happen at the kitchen table.
Yeah. And they found that statistically to be true, that the stability for family, the consistency of a family dinner. And we do know that these types of activities cut into that. And I just think, and I know that with us growing up, we regularly had family dinner. And that's even if my dad wasn't home, because my father traveled extensively, but we still had the family unit that was there. And if he was home, we definitely were having it. And the stability of that, because that is where you have those conversations. And I know in our house, it's been a priority on a level that I know it's not been in a lot of my children's friends' houses. And but it's such an important thing, and it just comes back to that reality of how much time we have. You only have so much time, and you only have so much time with your kids directly. Because if you're working or if they're in regular school, like you only have so much time directly with them, and so who are we giving their time to? Right?
Very much so.
Yeah. And, that makes me think about one of the things I really appreciated in growing up, both you and Dad did, was also making special time for dates with us as kids, a special date. And is there anything you want to, I don't know, share around that, of just, what you enjoyed about that, or what made you want to emphasize that with us?
Well, I was so pleased when Dad brought it up to do with all of you. But then I got to thinking about it also for me. I'm there all the time, but we're there in a different sense than when you go off together, just the two of you. So, and I know now I'm trying to make sure every month I see at least two of my grandchildren for a meal separate, just the two of us.
Yes.
And because there is you have to have the circumstance to get deeper conversations going. And you have to create the environment so that the child knows there's no questions that are off limit. They don't have to try to, they can ask, I just don't see why you do this. I think it's wrong or whatnot. And you can talk it through in that environment, not when they're contending with you in the middle of the family, but you can talk about that between the two of you. And I think that it's good because sometimes I, as a parent, realize, wow, I had only looked at that from my perspective, not from theirs. And sometimes, it was the other way around. So I think it's just a really important thing.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because it gives the opportunity to have discussions that you wouldn't necessarily be able to have in the heat of the moment or in the reality of going through your day. You just don't have time to have those conversations. So it gives an opportunity to have it in a peaceful environment where you can really go after those things. So I think that's a really great point. And honestly, again, I think we know this with our spouses. It's the same thing. That's why you need those date times, those when you're doing something that isn't just doing life together, but actually having, face-to-face time, eye to eye, where you can just be with one another and see what you want to talk about. So I think that's a great point. And it also brings up too, I think, again, something I really appreciate that you did with us was also finding just some interests that you like together. You always took me to the ballet or to art museums or, to the beach, camping as a family. Different activities that just allow you to have a shared interest. I think was something I really appreciated that you guys always did. And again, I think you as just your intentionality, I can tell you're very intentional about that. So maybe tell me a little bit about, anything around intentionality that you could think of, you could encourage parents of how to be intentional that way, maybe with some of these kinds of things. Because obviously it may be different for different families, but encouragement for them to be intentional in this way.
Well, I think you have to evaluate how things are and which of them you would like to modify someplace, or what isn't happening that you want to happen, and then intentionally find a way to do it. It's really a matter of identifying possibilities and then acting on them.
That actually reminds me of something you shared in the series around, again, going back to the extracurricular activities and the difficulty around that, because you wanted us to be able to have activities, but we have quite a big age gap, between us, because my brother was almost 7 years older than me. We were 3.5 years basically between each of us. So you had a large age spread there. And you gave an example of getting us on the same track team.
Yes.
And I don't know if you want to share what that example was and how that really was a unique solution that seemed like the Lord gave you.
Yeah, I would think, I would love to hear your example of it. But originally, Adam, some of you know Adam, he's athletic, and track was the thing that he could really do. That was what his dad had done. And so he got on this track team. But it really was a girls' team. But his enthusiasm for it made our daughter Rachel also.
Let me just clarify there. It was a co-ed team, but you're saying there was more girls on it at the time. Yeah.
I thought they just let a couple girls come because that was the only way. A couple guys come because that was the only way they could get the girls.
I don't know.
So, I mean, the parents wouldn't bring them both. So anyway, this is one where I got caught in this whole situation. But so anyway, so that got two of them there. So we were going, you and I were going, and we were sitting on the bench and watching them. But you were truly young enough then.
I was 5, I think about 5.
And you just really wanted to
be out there.
Yeah. And the coach saw it, and he thought, well, just fine, just don't interrupt the rest of them. So after a couple more practices, I saw, well, she feels like part of the team. She's getting the good effect, and I'm going to go get the groceries out of the way. So that's what we did. So everyone it was initially just the one child wanting to go to track, and then,
Well, and you had to, if I remember right, you had to ask the coach, like you said, to make, hey, can my other child participate in this? Because, And it was because it was obviously tons of different, there was different
Yeah.
age groups and different
Yeah.
things, but it was a wonderful kind of creative way where you found all three of us could be together at the same
Yes.
time,
Yep.
doing the same activity. And even though it wasn't, my top activity of choice, it was still something I could enjoy, and that I got to be there with the big kids.
Yes.
And for Adam and Rachel at the time, it was something they had really wanted to focus on. And I just thought it was a neat example of just praying. I think praying that the Lord would give you maybe a unique solution, because again, there's only so many hours in the day, and a lot of times when kids, like at my age, little kids, a lot of times they want to try 500 things. They don't really know what they like.
Yeah.
And so I think it made more sense at that time to have me as the littlest one, maybe sacrifice my first choice for my brother, who really knew that was it really mattered more to him at that point than to me. And so I think you just saw strategically there too, hey, she could still enjoy this. And then that allowed you to have time where all three of us were doing something, and you could go do the groceries or whatever. So I thought it was just a neat example of looking at those creative solutions to fill the needs, but not have you running all around town.
Yeah. And it wasn't that you had something else you wanted to do more in your situation, because you always were looking up to the older kids. So I think it worked that way. Now, had it been a ballet lesson that you had to give up, that would have been very different.
Yes.
Then I would have had to find a studio that had a lesson for you at the same time.
Well, and actually that does bring up conversely where I had to do the track for my brother. I think my brother had to do some of the ballet for me, because when we were in school together, he did get roped into a few ballet productions. Remember at the school that my sister and I were in, because they needed some boys to dance and do some acting parts. So, but what is cool about that is I have memories with my siblings of doing shared activities, and gave us a diversity of experiences too. I mean, of course, we all ended up with our own niche at that point. Although again, I think all three of us ended up in the dojo also at a certain point with my father, just, you're going to at least try karate. And just like you would say, hey, you're at least you'd take us to an art museum, and just exposure to culture and things like that too, I think was really something I really appreciated, that you're very, as part of that. So good. So anyway,
we still do that together.
Yes, we do. It's still one of the dates that we like to do together, is any kind of cultural event, which I love. So, well, as we come down the home stretch here in our conversation, is there anything that's just come to mind for you now? Now you're in this grandparenting stage too. And most grandchildren, of course, are older now, adults or young adults. Looking at them now from the perspective of what you did with us as children, now you have your grandchildren. I already heard obviously your intentionality of dates and time with them, which I really love that you're carrying that tradition on with the grandchildren. Is there anything else that sticks out to you from a grandmother's perspective that you would like to share?
I haven't thought along those lines, so it's a little more difficult off the top. But I guess the one thing I can say is we have held the line on the 5 major holidays that everybody knows are going to show up at grandma's house.
Yes.
Yes, and even we will switch it around, because my family had to do this when I was growing up. Switch it around as to who had which time thing for Thanksgiving dinner, and you would maybe have 2 Thanksgiving dinners because of obligations and different family connections. But I know you have one of those coming up at Easter, when Chad's
my husband's family plus my family, and going 2 places on the same day.
Going to my house and having it at her house. So all of these things. But I think having family traditions is hugely important. Hugely important, because there's always a reason why, well, we'll do that next month or whatnot. But if you have it tied to something specifically, it doesn't get rolled over to the next year.
Yes. Yeah. And that is a great tradition that's carried on with the grandkids, the importance of holidays and birthdays and just family dinners still with everyone. I think that's really a key thing. Are there any thoughts you'd have for, and just some closing questions here, for maybe just a new mom? Is there anything you wish that you had known maybe in the early childhood years, or actually really, you can pick any year. You could do early years or teenage years, things at any stage of motherhood that would be a nugget, a pearl of wisdom that you think, oh, I wish someone had shared this with me, or someone did share this with me and it really impacted me?
Yeah, that when I think about it, I didn't have a friend who'd had a child before I was pregnant. I had one older, the wife of one of Dennis's friends that I really didn't know that well. It's the only person I knew that had a baby.
Wow. So none of your peers were having babies at the same time that you were connected
and so,
to. Yeah.
so much that is around having kids. I was in a place where we were just we were Jesus people. Those of you that have seen the Jesus
movie,
Revolution,
yeah.
that was Southern California. I was there in Northern California. And so we were switching everything around about our lives. So some of my stuff, is probably not examples that would be happening now. But the biggest thing was that we all, because it was starting to be the decline of the family. So the whole thing is more around when you have young kids and whatnot, that you are part of a larger group. You're a part of your family. Hopefully you're part of a church community. I know this year in Easter, because unfortunately all my kids are real servants in the church, just like they're supposed to be. So we don't get to have Easter dinner until 4:00, and most of them are going to go in at about 8:00 to set things up for everybody else.
For the church service.
Yes, but that's another idea, example of where are your priorities. And so we make that work, that we're faithful to the fellowship of the saints, and we're also faithful to our family in our
so that's something you would emphasize for parents, the importance of community.
Yes.
So you're saying you didn't necessarily have it in the beginning for you, and as that grew for you, with, I know as you guys got involved in the local church and started a church and all those different things, that is something that's really important for parents to have a community around them. And I'm also hearing from you, maybe also a like-minded community that can help and encourage your children too.
Yes, in fact, but historically, the Jesus people were really the ones that brought family back into church. They were the ones that they saw church as their extended family, in large part because their real extended families were crumbling.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, this has been wonderful to get a bit of time with you discussing these things around parenting. And are there any last thoughts that you have that you would like to share as a mom and as a grandmother? And some point here, potentially, but hopefully the next couple of years, going to be a great grandmother. We got to get some of these grandkids married.
Yeah, she's putting some pressure on one in particular, not one of hers, somebody else's.
Yeah, mine are still a little young. But yeah, any closing thoughts on? I'd like to say this. Mother's Day actually is coming up. So, what would you just say to mothers out there, or an importance of motherhood, or something you appreciate about being a mom?
Oh, because you can really see what you did in your work. People who don't think that they are willing to give up a job, is what it amounts to, a career, the ability to go ahead in the job, to be a mother. For one thing, in most jobs, you don't really have to give it up. You maybe have to, for
different season,
or
something.
And different amounts of things. But it is just such it's the thing that you're feeling, that draw. It's actually the Holy Spirit, I believe, because I know that the reason that we have this capacity to be mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters, because God knows it'll be good for us. And he uses the example of, he calls Jesus his son, and we call him the Father.
Yes.
So family is just central to the eternal reality. And so bringing it into this temporary reality is super good.
It's a gift. Yeah. Amen.
Amen.